Jonathan Reed paused at the door, his hand resting on the old brass handle of the mansion's front entrance. He had just returned from a long day filled with endless meetings and hollow conversations. The silence that greeted him as he stepped inside was almost too familiar. The grand house, with its towering ceilings and echoing halls, felt like a hollow shell, a place that no longer held any warmth or life. His fingers brushed across the cool, smooth surface of his briefcase as he moved further into the foyer, the weight of the day settling heavily on his shoulders. The scent of fresh flowers from the entryway vase seemed almost out of place, a feeble attempt at masking the emptiness of the house. He didn't even look at the flowers, he never did. His eyes were fixed on the path ahead, heading straight toward his study where a glass of scotch awaited him. But then, as he passed the music room, he froze. It started as a soft, almost imperceptible note. He wasn't sure if it was real or if the strain of the day had begun playing tricks on his mind. He paused, listening. The note lingered, then another one followed. The sound was unmistakable, it was piano music. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. No one had played the piano in this house since Eliza died. Not once. The grand Steinway had sat untouched for years, its polished surface dull with the dust of abandonment. The silence of the room was like a monument to his grief, and yet, now, it was alive with music. The melody wasn't familiar, but there was something in it that tugged at the very core of him, something that resonated in ways he hadn't felt in years. He moved cautiously toward the open door, his feet almost silent against the polished marble floor. As he approached, the music grew clearer, more distinct. The notes cascaded effortlessly from the piano, as though someone had been playing this piece their entire life. He paused at the doorway, just out of sight, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. There, seated at the piano, was someone he had only briefly noticed before, Ariel, the new maid. Her back was straight, her hands moving with a grace that Jonathan had not expected. Her fingers flew across the keys, the fluidity of her playing telling him that this was no casual hobby. She played like someone who had been trained, someone who understood not just the mechanics of music but the soul of it. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He watched her for a moment longer, his eyes tracing her movements. She wore the standard Maid uniform, simple, drab, and practical, but there was nothing about her that seemed ordinary in that moment. She wasn't just cleaning. She wasn't just following orders. She was lost in the music, and the music was part of her. The piano, the notes, her expression, everything about the scene seemed so out of place in this grand, empty house. The rich mahogany walls and gold-trimmed furniture were silent witnesses to her presence, as though the room itself had come alive for the first time in years. He couldn't help himself. He took a step closer, the faintest creak of the floor beneath his shoes barely audible. He was so used to the silence that even the smallest sound seemed louder than it should have been. Ariel didn't hear him. Her eyes were closed, her focus solely on the music as her hands moved with a certainty that told Jonathan she wasn't playing for anyone but herself. The piece she played was slow, melancholic, with a haunting quality that wrapped around him, tugging at a part of his heart he had long since sealed away. The melody wove through the air, each note like a soft thread connecting him to something he had long forgotten, a memory, a feeling, a person. It was the kind of music that could break open old wounds without warning. Jonathan felt something stir within him. It was a feeling he couldn't place at first. Was it anger? Was it frustration? Or was it something else? Something buried deeper. The music came to an end, the final note hanging in the air like a whisper. For a brief moment, the room was silent again. Ariel opened her eyes slowly, her gaze falling upon him as if she had just realized he was there. Her fingers hovered above the keys, frozen. She sat up straighter, a look of surprise and fear crossing her face. Jonathan had never seen her look so vulnerable. I'm sorry, she said quickly, standing up abruptly. I didn't mean to disturb you. I didn't know you were home. Jonathan remained silent for a moment, his mind racing. He had to say something. But what? He had never been one for small talk, especially not when it came to matters like this. You play well, he said, his voice gruff, betraying no hint of the emotions that had just stirred inside him. Her eyes widened slightly at his comment, but she said nothing. Instead, she looked down at the piano keys, her hands wringing the edges of her apron nervously. I shouldn't have played, she muttered, her voice barely audible. I didn't think anyone would notice. I'll go. Jonathan shook his head, the words catching in his throat. No. Stay. She hesitated, a mix of confusion and hesitation in her expression. But, you don't want me to. Just play, Jonathan said, his tone softer now. Play again. Ariel looked at him for a long moment, as though trying to read him, to figure out what he was really asking. After a beat, she nodded and sat back down at the piano. Her fingers touched the keys once more, tentative at first, as though unsure whether she should continue. The room was still again, save for the soft sound of the piano, and Jonathan, still standing in the doorway, found himself unable to look away. The music was different this time, more tentative, perhaps more introspective. Ariel played without the same abandon as before, but the feeling was still there, still present. She finished the song quietly, the last note hanging in the air, unresolved. Jonathan stepped forward, a sense of unease building inside him. He cleared his throat. You're good, he said, though the words felt inadequate for what he was trying to express. Where did you learn to play like that? Ariel didn't answer right away. She seemed to consider his question, her fingers tracing the edge of the piano. I learned when I was young, she said quietly. My mother used to play. It's all I've ever really known. Jonathan nodded slowly. He had no idea what to say next. His thoughts were still tangled in the music, in the way it had made him feel, a feeling he hadn't had in years. I didn't mean to intrude, Ariel added, her voice soft and hesitant. I'll leave you to your evening, sir. No, Jonathan said again, the word coming out stronger this time. You don't have to go. She blinked at him in surprise, but before she could say anything else, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her staring after him. Her fingers hovered above the piano once more, but this time, she didn't play. The music had stopped, but the weight of it lingered, pressing heavily on the space between them. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The mansion felt oppressive in its quiet, even after Jonathan Reed had left the music room. Ariel sat motionless at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, but her mind was far away. The notes that had once flowed so freely from her fingers now seemed distant, like a dream fading with the morning light. She didn't dare to touch the piano again. It had been a moment of rebellion, a crack in the fortress she had built around herself. The silence after Jonathan's departure was deafening. She should have known better. She had worked for wealthy families before, families who expected their servants to be invisible, their lives as quiet and unnoticed as the dust that accumulated on the mantels. She was no stranger to the unspoken rules, the boundaries between them and us. She wasn't supposed to be heard. She wasn't supposed to be noticed. The piano was their world, not hers. But the music, had called to her. It had been a way to survive, to escape the heavy burden of the life she'd been given. She had always known she was different, always felt the sharp divide between the world of the privileged and the one she had to navigate. When she played, it was the only time she could forget her place, forget the stares, forget the whispers. It was the only time she could remember who she used to be, before everything had changed. Ariel's gaze lingered on the keys before her. She had only been in the house for a week, but the familiar weight of her old life had already started to creep in, tightening its grip around her heart. Her hands trembled slightly, and she pulled them away from the piano as though it had burned her. She couldn't afford to let herself slip again. Not now. Not here. She had learned to bury her emotions long ago, after the things she had lost. After the day her mother had passed, she had learned to shut down everything that might make her weak. Music, however, had always been her refuge. It was the one thing she had carried with her, even when everything else had been taken away. But that had been her mother's legacy, not hers. Ariel had learned to live in silence, and silence was what had kept her safe. The truth was, she hadn't wanted to come to this house. It hadn't been her choice. She had been running from something, someone, and this job was her escape. The Reed estate was far from her past life in New Orleans, far from the memories she could never shake. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild. But something about this place felt different. It felt colder, somehow. And Jonathan Reed, he was different too. He wasn't like the others. There was a depth to him, an emptiness that mirrored her own. It unsettled her. And when she had sat down at the piano tonight, it had felt like something had shifted, something broken open. For the first time in years, she had allowed herself to feel something. But now, she was paying the price. She could already feel the tension between them, the uncertainty that clung to the air like smoke. Ariel stood up from the piano bench, her movements stiff. She needed to focus. There was work to be done. She could feel the weight of the evening's gaze on her, the weight of his presence still lingering in the room like an unwelcome visitor. Just get through the day. Just get through tomorrow. She moved quickly across the room, tidying up the space around the piano, even though it hardly needed it. She had to do something with her hands, something to keep her mind from spiraling. But as she turned toward the door, she heard footsteps. Soft at first, like the careful tread of someone who didn't want to be heard. It was Jonathan again. Ariel's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why he had returned, but her instinct screamed at her to retreat, to hide away in the corners of the house where she could remain invisible. He stepped inside without knocking, his presence filling the doorway like an ominous shadow. Ariel's breath caught in her throat. The tension between them was palpable now, thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. Jonathan didn't speak right away. He just stood there, watching her. Ariel's skin tingled under his gaze, her fingers still gripping the edge of the piano. He had seen her play, no one else in this house had ever seen her in that light. And now that he had, she felt exposed. She wasn't sure if he would reprimand her, dismiss her, or worse, ask her to leave. But Jonathan didn't do any of those things. Instead, he stepped into the room, his eyes never leaving her. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said, his voice softer than it had been before, more measured. "I didn't mean to startle you." Ariel was silent for a long moment. She didn't trust herself to speak. She didn't want to say the wrong thing, to expose the vulnerability she had fought so hard to bury. "It's all right," she replied quietly, forcing the words from her throat. "I shouldn't have played." He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "No, you should've. You were right to play." Ariel couldn't hide her surprise. Was he, being kind? Was this a shift she hadn't expected? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Jonathan stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate. "Why don't you want to play here?" he asked. "You're clearly talented." Ariel's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth, to explain why music, why the piano, was her only connection to a life she could barely remember. But the words didn't come. Instead, she just shrugged. "I'm not sure it matters," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a maid. That's not what I'm supposed to be doing here." Jonathan's expression darkened slightly, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. There was something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, watching her carefully. "That's not how I see you," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "I see you as someone who knows how to feel things. Someone who doesn't run from them." Ariel didn't know what to say to that. It felt like a challenge, like an invitation into something dangerous. She wasn't sure she was ready for that. She had spent years building walls, brick by brick, around her heart. And now, it felt as if Jonathan Reed had found a crack in that foundation, one that she couldn't repair. "I don't know what you mean," she murmured, turning away from him, her back to the piano, her fingers now digging into the wooden edge. Jonathan's voice was softer now, almost tender. "You don't have to tell me everything. But I don't want you to feel like you have to hide here. Not from me. Not from yourself." Ariel's heart raced. His words hit her like a sudden gust of wind, throwing her off balance. She could hear the subtle ache in his voice, the rawness that suggested a depth of sorrow she hadn't expected from him. "I'm not hiding," she said, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "I'm just trying to survive." Jonathan stood in the doorway for a moment longer, his gaze lingering on her. Then, without a word, he turned and left the room, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. Ariel stayed where she was, staring at the piano as if it might hold the answers she was too afraid to ask for. For a long time, she didn't move. The next few days passed in a blur for Ariel. Each morning, she woke before the sun and prepared the house for its occupants, moving through the halls with practiced efficiency. Her mind, however, was often elsewhere, caught in the moment she had shared with Jonathan at the piano. His presence was still fresh in her mind, the soft tone of his voice, the way he had looked at her, almost as if he had seen through her carefully constructed walls. She couldn't afford to dwell on it. She couldn't afford to let herself be distracted. After all, she was here to work, not to seek any kind of connection. Her life had taught her that much. Emotions only made things complicated. Feelings, desires, and dreams, those were luxuries she could no longer afford. Still, no matter how hard she tried to bury the memory of Jonathan's words, they kept resurfacing. "I don't want you to feel like you have to hide here. Not from me. Not from yourself." The vulnerability in his tone had shaken her, and for reasons she couldn't quite explain, it made her feel both uncomfortable and alive. But the truth was, Jonathan Reed was a millionaire. He was a man of power and influence, and she was just a maid. She couldn't afford to forget her place. He had made his life in the world of wealth and status. She had made hers in silence and survival. That thought, survival, was a constant in her mind. Every time she woke up in this house, it reminded her of her need to stay hidden, to remain small, invisible. She had to stay in the shadows, where no one could see her. Ariel knew better than anyone that when you were seen, you risked being discarded. When you were seen, you risked losing everything. On the 5th day after their brief encounter at the piano, Ariel found herself standing in the hallway outside the study. Jonathan had asked her to bring him a file, one of many tasks that seemed to fill her day. But this time, something was different. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense that today might not be like the others. When she knocked gently on the door, Jonathan called her in, and the sound of his voice sent a ripple of unease through her. She opened the door slowly, stepping inside the study. Jonathan was sitting at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, his face tense as he read through them. The room felt colder than usual, the tall windows casting long shadows across the floor. He glanced up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Ariel," he said, his voice soft, almost distant. "I didn't expect you so soon." "I brought the file you asked for, Mr. Reed," she said, holding the folder in her hands, trying to keep her tone neutral. Jonathan nodded, taking the file from her without looking at it. He stared at her for a long moment, and she could feel the weight of his gaze on her, his eyes searching for something. "Please, sit," he said, surprising her. Ariel hesitated. She wasn't used to being invited to sit, especially not in this room. This was Jonathan's domain, his space. She had always been the one to stand, to serve, to stay out of the way. But today, something was different. She could feel it, like a shift in the air that made the room feel both too small and too large at the same time. She sat down across from him, trying to steady her breath, though her heart was beating faster than she liked. Jonathan pushed the file aside, leaning back in his chair. His expression softened slightly, but there was still a sharpness in his eyes that made Ariel uneasy. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "About not wanting to be seen. Not wanting to be noticed." Ariel's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring that up again. She hadn't expected him to remember. "I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, looking away. "I just—" "You don't have to explain yourself," he interrupted gently, though there was an intensity in his voice that sent a chill down her spine. "I understand more than you think." Ariel's chest tightened. She had been afraid of this. She had been afraid of being understood. It was easier to remain invisible, easier to hide behind the walls she had built. If Jonathan understood her, that meant she could no longer hide. And if she couldn't hide, what would that mean for her? Jonathan's gaze never wavered, and she could feel him reading her, peeling back the layers of her carefully constructed defenses. She tried to remain still, to maintain the distance she had always kept, but something about him made it hard to do so. "You're not just a maid, Ariel," Jonathan said softly, his voice low but steady. "You're a person. And I don't think you've allowed yourself to be one for a long time." The word struck her like a physical blow. Ariel's throat tightened, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair beneath her. She wanted to say something, to argue, to deny it. But she couldn't. She couldn't lie about the truth he had just exposed. She had spent years pretending to be small, to be nothing. It was the only way to survive. And now, here was Jonathan, telling her that she didn't have to live that way anymore. "Why are you saying this?" Ariel whispered, unable to mask the vulnerability in her voice. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about my life." Jonathan didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't need to know everything to see that there's more to you than what you show the world," he said, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "I see it in the way you move, the way you speak. You're not just some servant. You're a person with a story. And I think you deserve more than this." Ariel could feel the tears stinging the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. She had learned long ago that tears were a sign of weakness, and she couldn't afford to be weak. "I don't want to talk about this," she said sharply, standing up from the chair. "I'm here to work, Mr. Reed. Nothing more." Jonathan's eyes softened as he watched her, but he didn't argue. He stood up slowly, walking toward her, his movements deliberate. "You don't have to be anything you don't want to be, Ariel," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "But I think you deserve the chance to choose. To decide who you want to be. Not just survive, but live." The words hung in the air between them, and Ariel felt a weight settle deep in her chest. She didn't know how to respond. How could she respond to something she didn't even understand herself? Jonathan stepped back, giving her space, but his presence still loomed over her like a shadow. "Think about it," he said softly. "You don't have to hide anymore. Not here. Not with me." And then he turned, walking away from her without another word. Ariel stood frozen in place, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. She had come here to escape. She had come here to forget. But Jonathan Reed was right about one thing: she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to wonder what it would mean to truly live. The days following Jonathan's conversation with Ariel passed in an unusual quietness. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but tense, charged with anticipation, like the calm before a storm. Ariel continued her work at the Reed estate with the same precision she always had, her movements mechanical, her emotions buried deep beneath layers of well-crafted walls. But the thought of Jonathan's words lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade, growing larger every time she allowed herself a moment of weakness. She had never let herself get close to anyone, not after the way her life had unraveled. Not after the tragedy that had taken everything from her. So, she buried herself in work, keeping her distance from the other staff and from Jonathan. But he, for reasons Ariel couldn't understand, seemed determined to break through her defenses. It wasn't just the piano incident anymore. It was the way he looked at her now. The way he made her feel like something more than just the maid. The way he spoke to her with a quiet understanding, like he could see beyond the surface, to the parts of her she had buried long ago. It unsettled her, and she didn't know how to handle it. But she had no choice but to endure it. On the 7th day after their conversation, Ariel was in the garden, trimming the overgrown hedges by the back of the house. She enjoyed the solitude of the garden, the sound of the shears slicing through the branches, the coolness of the earth beneath her feet. It was a moment where she could forget about everything, about Jonathan, about the life she had lost, about the nagging feeling that there was something more to her life than she was willing to admit. As she worked, the wind rustled the leaves, sending a gentle shiver through the trees. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden. It was the time of day when everything felt still, when the world seemed to hold its breath. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. Jonathan. He was walking toward her, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as though to prepare for some kind of reprimand. But to her surprise, he didn't say anything. He simply stood there, watching her. She tried to keep her composure, but the weight of his gaze made her feel exposed, like she was standing in front of him without a single layer to protect her. She had never felt so vulnerable in her life. "What are you doing here, Mr. Reed?" she asked, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. Jonathan smiled, though there was something tired in his eyes. "I could ask you the same thing, Ariel." She frowned, not understanding. "I'm working. As I always do." "I see that," he said, taking a step closer. "But you don't need to hide behind your work, you know. It's okay to be yourself." Ariel stiffened, the words catching her off guard. "I don't know what you mean," she said quickly, her tone defensive. Jonathan sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, but one that held an unspoken weight. "You don't have to keep up the wall anymore, Ariel. You don't have to shut yourself off from everything, everyone. I've seen it before. People trying to bury their pain, their fear. But it doesn't help. It just makes you colder, more distant. And that's not who you are." Ariel's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, as if his words had physically pushed her away. "I don't need you to tell me what I am or am not," she replied, her voice tight. "I'm here to work. That's all." Jonathan didn't flinch. He simply regarded her for a moment, as though weighing something in his mind. Then, his expression softened, and for the first time, Ariel saw something like empathy in his eyes. "You're not just here to work, Ariel," he said quietly. "I think you know that." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. Because deep down, she knew he was right. She wasn't just here to work. But she couldn't admit that. Not to him, not to anyone. She had spent too long learning how to survive in the shadows, how to be invisible. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I don't know what you see when you look at me. But I'm not. I'm not like the other people you know. I'm not like you." Jonathan tilted his head slightly, as though considering her words. Then, he stepped even closer, until there was only a few feet of space between them. "You're more alike than you think," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. "I've seen pain, Ariel. I know what it looks like. And I see it in you." But it doesn't have to define you. You don't have to carry it alone. Her heart raced, and she wanted to look away, to walk away, to distance herself from the rawness in his voice. But something kept her there. Something about his presence made her want to listen, made her want to hear the rest of what he had to say. "I've been carrying it for a long time," she said, her voice small. "Longer than you could possibly understand." Jonathan's expression shifted. It was no longer just the casual indifference of a rich man. It was something deeper, something real. He took another step forward, his voice softer now, more understanding. "Maybe I don't understand everything," he said. "But I do understand loss. And I understand what it feels like to have your world torn apart." The words hit her like a tidal wave, knocking the breath from her chest. For the briefest moment, Ariel let herself look at him, not just the wealthy, distant man who owned the house, but the man who had also suffered, who had his own burdens to bear. "I've lost people too," Jonathan continued, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "And I know what it's like to feel like you have to shut yourself off, to protect yourself from the world. But you don't have to do that with me." Ariel felt the walls she had so carefully built around her begin to crack. She could feel the dam inside her starting to weaken, the flood of emotions she had kept buried for so long threatening to break free. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered, the words slipping from her mouth before she could stop them. "I don't know how to let go of all the things I've been holding on to." Jonathan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stood there, watching her with a kind of quiet understanding that made Ariel feel exposed in a way that both terrified and comforted her. "You don't have to do it all at once," he said finally, his voice gentle. "Just take it one step at a time. When you're ready." The silence between them stretched, and for the first time, Ariel didn't feel like she had to fill it with words or with work. She just stood there, allowing herself to breathe, allowing herself to be seen. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like the worst thing in the world. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one a gradual shift, a gentle yet undeniable change in the air between Ariel and Jonathan. The garden, which had once been her refuge, no longer felt like a solitary place. Jonathan's words lingered there, in the soft rustling of the leaves, in the quiet moments of the early morning when the world seemed still and calm. But she couldn't quite bring herself to trust the idea that something could change. She had spent so many years constructing her own walls, telling herself that they were necessary for survival, that to tear them down now felt impossible, even dangerous. Ariel threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, trying to focus on the tasks at hand, the endless chores that made up her life. She would scrub, polish, arrange, and clean, but no matter how busy she kept herself, she couldn't silence the nagging thoughts that followed her everywhere. Jonathan's face kept appearing in her mind. His steady gaze, his voice full of understanding. The more she tried to push him away, the more he seemed to stay. The tension that had been building between them finally came to a head one rainy evening, as Ariel was finishing up in the kitchen. The storm outside had been relentless all day, the wind howling against the windows, the sound of the rain pounding the roof like a constant drumbeat. The house had taken on a colder, more desolate feeling, with every creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. She had just finished washing the last of the dishes when she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Without turning around, Ariel knew who it was. There was something about the way Jonathan moved, like he had all the time in the world, like he wasn't in a hurry to escape the quiet of the house. She took a deep breath and set the dish towel down, her heart racing in her chest. "Ariel," Jonathan's voice broke through the silence, soft but commanding. "I need to talk to you." She didn't turn to face him immediately. Instead, she busied herself with wiping the countertop, her hands moving quickly, deliberately. She couldn't look at him yet. Not when the emotions swirling inside her were threatening to spill over. "I'm not sure there's anything left to say," Ariel replied, her voice coming out colder than she intended. "We've talked. I've listened. I don't need to hear it again." Jonathan didn't respond right away, and for a brief moment, Ariel wondered if he would just leave. But then she heard him move closer, his footsteps slow but steady. His presence filled the room, and it was as though the space between them was charged with some unspoken tension. "You're running away from something, Ariel," Jonathan said softly. "I can see it. You've been hiding from it for a long time. But I can't just stand by and let you keep running." Ariel froze, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't deny that he was right. She had been running. Running from the past, from the pain, from the fear of being seen. But she couldn't let him see her like this. She couldn't let him see how fragile she was, how broken she felt. "I'm not running from anything," she said, her voice a little too sharp. "I'm here to work. That's all." Jonathan sighed, and Ariel felt the weight of his gaze on her, felt it like a physical presence in the room. His voice was low, almost a whisper, when he spoke again. "No, Ariel. You're not just here to work. You're hiding. And I'm not going to let you do that anymore." His words hit her like a punch to the gut, and she spun around to face him, her emotions boiling over. "You don't know anything about me, Jonathan. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what it's like to lose everything, to have nothing left but the memory of what you once had." The anger in her voice surprised her, but it was real, raw, and it cut through the air between them. For a moment, she thought Jonathan might back away, might retreat like he had the first time she had pushed him away. But he didn't. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers, and the intensity of his gaze made her heart race. "I don't know what you've been through," he said, his voice soft but unwavering. "But I do know that you don't have to keep carrying it alone. You don't have to keep carrying it at all. You're not the only one who's lost. I've lost too, Ariel. But you can't let that define who you are. You can't let it control you forever." The vulnerability in his voice, the quiet strength behind his words, disarmed her in a way nothing else had. She had always thought that her pain was something she had to carry by herself, that it was a burden too heavy for anyone else to understand. But Jonathan was offering her something she hadn't known she needed, an understanding that wasn't rooted in pity, but in something more profound. Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, but Jonathan saw. He saw her, in a way no one ever had. And that terrified her. Because in that moment, Ariel realized that Jonathan wasn't just a man trying to get close to her out of some fleeting sense of kindness. He was trying to help her, trying to pull her out of the darkness she had buried herself in. And that felt both like a lifeline and a threat. "I don't know how to let go of it," Ariel whispered, her voice barely audible, as the walls she had built so carefully began to crack. Jonathan stepped forward, his hand reaching out, almost as if he was waiting for her to take it. But Ariel pulled back, her body stiffening, her heart pounding in her chest. "You don't have to let go all at once," he said softly. "You just have to let yourself breathe. Let yourself feel again. Let yourself be seen." Ariel shook her head, unable to find the words to explain the storm inside her. She wanted to push him away, to tell him to leave her alone, to retreat back into the safety of her walls. But she couldn't. Not anymore. She took a step toward him, then stopped, unsure of what she was doing, unsure of where this was leading. She had spent so long convincing herself that she could never have this, that she could never let someone in, that she could never allow herself to be vulnerable. But here she was, on the verge of something she didn't understand, something that both terrified and exhilarated her. Jonathan's eyes softened, and he gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You don't have to be afraid, Ariel. Whatever you're carrying, we'll face it together. You don't have to face it alone." For the first time in years, Ariel allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to put down the weight of her past. Maybe she could finally start to live, instead of just surviving. As Jonathan took a small step back, giving her space, Ariel felt a shift inside her. She didn't know what the future held, or what it would mean to let go of the walls she had built around her heart. But in that moment, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. The days following that fateful night felt like a blur of contradictions, moments of clarity intertwined with waves of uncertainty. Ariel's heart had not yet fully embraced the vulnerability Jonathan had invited her to explore, but something inside her had shifted. She could no longer pretend that the walls she had built were impenetrable. Despite her efforts to keep her distance, she found herself drawn to him, like a moth to a flame, knowing full well the dangers of getting too close. Jonathan, on the other hand, seemed to sense the hesitation within her. He didn't push. He didn't force. But he was there. Steadily present, always in the background, offering her a silent promise that he wouldn't leave. It was a promise she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. Ariel found herself at a crossroads in her life, torn between the self-imposed isolation that had kept her safe for years and the allure of something new, something that threatened to break open the quiet, controlled life she had created. She often found herself wandering the estate at night, seeking solace in the dark corners of the property, where the world seemed to disappear. The sprawling grounds of the Reed estate, with its endless gardens and dark, towering trees, had always been a place of refuge. But now, they felt suffocating, as though every path led her back to the same question: could she allow herself to be seen? One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the estate, Ariel found herself once again standing at the edge of the garden. She wasn't working, wasn't tending to the flowers or trimming the hedges. She was simply there, alone with her thoughts, unsure of where to go next. The cool breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over her. She didn't know what she was waiting for, but she knew she was on the verge of something. Something important. Something she couldn't yet name. And then, just as the air seemed to still, she heard it, footsteps approaching. It was Jonathan. She could tell by the way he walked, the steady cadence of his steps. She didn't turn to face him, but she didn't run either. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to retreat or shield herself. She simply stood there, her back to him, waiting. "Mind if I join you?" Jonathan's voice broke through the stillness, soft and unassuming, yet full of warmth. Ariel took a deep breath, then nodded. "I suppose it's not like I own the garden," she said, her voice a little too sharp, as if to cover the vulnerability she didn't want to admit she felt. He didn't respond to her tone, instead walking over to stand beside her. They stood there in silence for a while, watching the last traces of daylight fade from the sky. The tension between them, though unspoken, was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Ariel could feel Jonathan's presence beside her, as if he were waiting for her to speak, waiting for her to say something, anything, that would break the silence. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've told you I'm not looking for friendship. I'm not looking for anything from you." Jonathan turned his head slightly to look at her, but his expression remained calm, his eyes soft, not accusatory. "I know," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm still here because I see something in you, Ariel. Something you might not even see in yourself." She shook her head, the words too much for her to process. "I don't need your pity," she snapped, though deep down, she knew that wasn't really what she was angry about. It was the way he made her feel, exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see through every defense she had built. And she hated it. Hated that he was making her question everything she thought she knew about herself. "It's not pity," Jonathan said quietly, his voice carrying a quiet conviction. "It's understanding. And I think, deep down, you know that." Ariel closed her eyes, her fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream, to tell him to leave her alone, but the words got caught in her throat. She didn't want to need anyone. She didn't want to need him. But a small, nagging part of her couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe she did need something more than the loneliness she had chosen for so long. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything, to have nothing left but the echo of what once was. Jonathan's eyes softened, and for a moment, he said nothing, simply watching her. And then, in the silence, he took a step closer to her. No, I don't understand that pain, Ariel. But I do know what it feels like to lose something you thought you could never live without. Ariel turned her head sharply to look at him. There was something in his gaze, something raw, something vulnerable, that caught her off guard. She had always thought of Jonathan as a man who had everything, a man who had never known true loss. But now, looking at him, she saw the cracks in his armor. He wasn't the infallible, perfect man she had built him up to be. He was human. And that realization, as unsettling as it was, opened a door in her heart that she had long kept locked. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore, she whispered, the admission slipping from her lips before she could stop it. I've spent so long building walls around myself that I don't know who I am without them. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, and then he stepped closer, standing beside her once more. You don't have to trust me all at once, he said, his voice gentle, but firm. You just have to take the first step. Let me be here for you, Ariel. Just, let me be here. The words hung in the air between them, the weight of them pressing down on Ariel's chest. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she was ready to let someone in, especially someone like Jonathan. But in that moment, for the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her, a flicker of hope, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could start to trust again. I don't know how, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You don't have to know how, Jonathan said softly. Just take the first step. I'll be here, no matter what. And for the first time in so long, Ariel believed him. Ariel stood at the edge of the garden the following morning, the sun breaking through the clouds and casting warm light over the flowers that still dripped with rain. It felt as though the world had been washed clean overnight. The heavy fog that had clouded her thoughts seemed to have lifted, but something deeper lingered. The unease, the gnawing fear of what might come next, sat just beneath the surface, waiting. Jonathan had left her with words she couldn't shake. Just take the first step. It echoed in her mind with the persistence of a heartbeat. She didn't know how to do it, how to begin, how to trust him, or anyone, after so many years of self-imposed distance. But deep down, she felt something shift inside her, like a quiet stirring, the first ripple of water disturbed by an unseen hand. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. And for the first time, Ariel wondered if she could allow herself to move toward it. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Jonathan was always present when she least expected him, his presence both a comfort and a challenge. She had spent years building walls so high that it would take nothing short of a storm to bring them down. But the storm had come. It had arrived in the form of his quiet insistence, in the weight of his gaze, in the simple act of standing beside her, waiting for her to decide if she was ready. He stopped a few paces behind her, and for a moment, they stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of unspoken things hanging in the air between them. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his voice soft but full of purpose. I don't expect you to have all the answers, Ariel. I don't expect you to have everything figured out. But I think you're ready to take that first step. Ariel didn't turn to face him immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath and let it out slowly, trying to calm the storm within her. She wanted to scream, to tell him to leave her alone, to send him away the way she had done so many times before. But she didn't. Something inside her stopped her, something that felt too important to ignore. For a long time, Ariel had prided herself on being self-sufficient, on being the one who carried her burdens alone, who needed no one. She had convinced herself that she didn't need anyone to survive. She had believed that the only way to protect herself was to shut everyone out, to keep them at arm's length. She had believed that loneliness was a small price to pay for the safety of her heart. But now, as she stood here in the garden with Jonathan, she realized how empty that belief had made her feel. It had made her forget what it meant to be seen, to be known, to be cared for. She turned to face him then, the weight of her decision settling in her chest. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to trust again." Jonathan's expression softened, and he took a step toward her, his presence gentle but unyielding. "You don't have to know how, Ariel. You just have to be willing to try." Ariel swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to protect herself, to retreat into the safety of the walls she had built. But something in Jonathan's eyes held her there. It wasn't pity or obligation, it was something deeper. It was a quiet understanding, a promise that he wouldn't push her too far, but he would be there, waiting. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Jonathan nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know. But you don't have to face it alone." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Ariel felt the tension in her chest ease slightly, like the first breath of air after being submerged under water. It was a small shift, but it was real. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. For the first time in years, she felt something other than the suffocating grip of isolation. She felt the weight of connection, the pull of something she had long denied herself. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't instant. But it was real. Jonathan didn't reach for her, didn't force the moment. Instead, he simply stood there, his eyes meeting hers, patient and unwavering. It was as if he was waiting for her to make the choice herself. And in that moment, Ariel realized something: she didn't need to have everything figured out. She didn't need to know what came next. She just needed to take that first step. Without saying a word, she reached out and placed her hand in his. It was a small gesture, simple and unassuming, but it carried with it more weight than any words could convey. In that moment, Ariel understood what it meant to trust, not just Jonathan, but herself. She didn't need to have it all figured out. She just needed to be willing to let go of the past, to take a step into the unknown. Jonathan's hand closed around hers, a silent acknowledgement of what had just passed between them. His touch wasn't demanding, wasn't a promise of anything other than his presence. And that, for Ariel, was enough. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know where this fragile connection between them would lead. But for the first time in a long time, Ariel felt the weight of the world begin to lift from her shoulders. She had taken the first step. And that was enough. The morning after Ariel took the first step, the air felt different. There was a palpable shift in the way she moved through the world, as if the weight of her past, the burdens she had carried for so long, had become just a little bit lighter. The estate still felt the same, the endless gardens, the sprawling house, the towering trees, but somehow, everything seemed different. The world, for the first time in years, felt full of possibility rather than confinement. She spent the day working in the garden, her hands busy with the flowers, the earth, but her mind wasn't entirely on the task at hand. The conversation with Jonathan, his gentle encouragement, still lingered in her thoughts, a quiet hum beneath everything she did. She had felt something that morning, something she hadn't felt in so long, a spark of hope. It wasn't a blazing fire, but it was there, smoldering quietly in her chest, asking her to give it more of her attention, to fan it into something more. But even as she worked, even as she breathed in the scent of the roses and the jasmine, she couldn't shake the fear that lingered just beneath the surface. The fear of what it would mean to let go of the control she had fought so hard to maintain. The fear of trusting someone else, of letting someone see the parts of her she had kept hidden for so long. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that, but the small spark inside her refused to be ignored. Around noon, as she wiped the sweat from her brow, she noticed a figure walking toward her across the garden. It was Jonathan. He was dressed casually, in jeans and a light shirt, his hands tucked into his pockets. His presence, though familiar now, still unsettled her in a way she didn't entirely understand. But today, there was something different about him. He wasn't coming toward her with the usual quiet patience. There was a glint of something else in his eyes, a determination, a kind of silent plea. "Hey," he said, his voice warm, but with an edge to it. "How are you feeling?" Ariel hesitated before responding. She wasn't sure how to explain it. "I'm fine. I'm just working," she said, trying to brush off the vulnerability she had been feeling. She didn't want to acknowledge that, despite her outward composure, she was still grappling with the weight of her emotions. Jonathan stopped a few feet away from her, his gaze softening. "I don't think you're just working," he said, his voice gentle but insistent. "I think you're avoiding something." Ariel's chest tightened, and she stood up straighter, defensive. "I'm not avoiding anything," she snapped, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. She was avoiding everything. She was avoiding the discomfort of facing her own feelings, of facing the truth of how much she had been running from the possibility of connection for so long. "You're afraid," Jonathan said simply, his voice steady, as though he knew the words would sting. And they did. They stung more than she wanted to admit. "I'm not afraid," she said quickly, her voice rising a little in pitch. "I just—" "You are," he interrupted, but there was no anger in his tone. "Only understanding. And that's okay. But you don't have to face it alone." Ariel swallowed, her breath coming a little faster now. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected him to see right through her, to cut through the layers of her defenses so easily. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for him to make her face her own fear, her own reluctance to trust. "I've spent so long building walls around myself," Ariel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to take them down." Jonathan nodded slowly, stepping closer, but not too close. "I know. But you've already started. You took the first step when you reached out to me. That's more than you give yourself credit for." Ariel closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words settling over her. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to feel so vulnerable, so exposed. But for reasons she couldn't quite explain, the walls that had kept her safe for so long were beginning to crumble, one piece at a time. And it was terrifying. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for some kind of answer, something that would make sense of all the emotions swirling inside her. "What if I'm not ready?" she asked quietly. "What if I never will be?" Jonathan's expression softened, and he stepped closer, but again, he didn't reach for her. Instead, he offered her something even more important, his presence. "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing to try. The rest will come when it's meant to." Ariel swallowed hard. The words felt like a lifeline, even though she wasn't sure if she could hold on. She had spent so much time shutting everyone out, thinking that if she could just keep her emotions under control, she could protect herself from the pain of losing someone again. But now, with Jonathan standing here, she realized how hollow that belief had become. "What do you want from me, Jonathan?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are you still here? Why do you keep pushing me?" He gave her a small, knowing smile. "I'm not pushing you, Ariel. I'm just here. I'm just giving you space to figure it out, at your own pace. But I believe in you. I believe you can face whatever this is." For a moment, Ariel didn't know how to respond. She wanted to push him away, to tell him to stop trying to help her. But she didn't. Instead, she let the silence stretch between them, feeling the weight of his words sink deeper into her heart. Maybe she wasn't ready, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe taking it one step at a time was enough. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible now. "I'm scared of being hurt. I'm scared of opening myself up and losing everything again." Jonathan stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can't promise you that you won't get hurt. I can't promise that things won't be difficult. But I can promise you that I'll be here. And I'll help you carry it, if you'll let me." The sincerity in his voice, the quiet strength behind his words, made Ariel's chest tighten. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to offer her something so simple, but so profound. He wasn't asking her to trust him completely right away. He was just asking her to take a small step, to let him be there with her as she figured it out. She nodded slowly, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out to him. This was the unknown, the uncharted territory she had spent years avoiding. But now, she was ready to take the first step. She didn't know where it would lead, or what it would cost her, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. The days following Ariel's conversation with Jonathan felt both long and short, like time had taken on a different rhythm. She could feel the subtle changes within herself, the small cracks forming in the walls that had protected her for so long. It was unsettling, yet liberating, this feeling of vulnerability, of being open to the possibility of connection. And with each passing day, as she moved through the sprawling estate, the thought of what could come next began to settle into her bones like a quiet whisper. But it wasn't just Jonathan's quiet patience that had shifted something in her. It was the simple fact that, for the first time in years, someone was seeing her, not just the surface, not just the mask she had so carefully constructed, but the real Ariel. And that frightened her more than she cared to admit. To be seen meant to be known, and to be known meant she could be hurt. Yet, for some reason she couldn't quite put into words, the thought of being hurt no longer seemed as terrifying as it once had. There was something in Jonathan's unwavering presence that made her feel as though, if she did fall, she wouldn't have to fall alone. On a particularly quiet morning, as she sipped coffee in the large kitchen, her mind wandered back to the first time she had arrived at the estate. It had been an escape from the life she had known, from the pain, from the suffocating expectations that had plagued her for years. The estate, with its endless hallways and lush gardens, had been her sanctuary. But now, it felt more like a place that held a future she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Ariel set her mug down on the kitchen counter and gazed out the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the landscape. She thought about her family, about the years of distance between them. There had been so much pain, so many misunderstandings. She had thought that cutting ties, building her own life away from them, would give her the peace she needed. But in reality, it had only left her feeling more isolated, more disconnected from everything that truly mattered. And now, with Jonathan's quiet persistence, she could feel those ties, those familial connections, pulling at her once more, beckoning her to reevaluate everything she had once believed about herself, about love, and about the kind of life she wanted to live. Just as the weight of those thoughts began to settle over her, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her. Jonathan. She didn't need to look to know who it was. He had become a constant in her life, a presence that felt both comforting and challenging at once. He stood by the doorframe, watching her in silence for a moment before speaking. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. Ariel turned to face him, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before she lowered them to the floor. She didn't want to talk about it, not yet. But there was something in the way Jonathan looked at her, something that made her feel as though he would understand, even if she didn't have the right words to explain it. "I've been thinking about my family," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About how far away I've kept them. About the choices I've made." Jonathan didn't say anything immediately, but Ariel could feel the weight of his gaze. She knew he was waiting, giving her space to continue when she was ready. "I don't know if I can fix what's broken," she added, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't know if it's even worth trying." Jonathan stepped closer, his presence solid and grounding. "Sometimes, we don't fix things. Sometimes, we just have to let them be. The question is, are you ready to let yourself feel again? To open up to what's possible?" Ariel let out a shaky breath, her chest tightening as the emotions she had long buried started to surface. She had been running for so long. Running from her family, from her past, from the parts of herself she didn't want to face. She had convinced herself that distancing herself from everyone was the only way to protect herself. But now, she wasn't so sure. Jonathan's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she wondered if it was time to stop running. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice raw. "I'm scared of losing everything again. Of getting hurt. I don't know how to trust anymore." Jonathan's expression softened, and without a word, he reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His touch was grounding, a silent promise that he wasn't going anywhere, that he wasn't going to let her fall. "I'm not asking you to trust me all at once," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to trust yourself, to take the next step forward, no matter how small it may seem." Ariel's throat tightened as she fought back the tears that had threatened to fall for days. She had spent so long holding everything inside, keeping herself from feeling too much, from caring too much. But now, with Jonathan's steady presence, she could feel the dam beginning to crack, and the flood of emotions that followed threatened to overwhelm her. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't have to do it alone," Jonathan replied softly. "We'll figure it out together." For the first time, Ariel allowed herself to believe him. She didn't know how it would all turn out, and she didn't know if she was ready to face the truth of her past. But as she looked into Jonathan's eyes, she felt a flicker of hope, something she hadn't felt in years. It was the belief that maybe, just maybe, she could open herself up again, that she could learn to trust again. The next few days felt like a blur of small steps. She had begun reaching out, tentatively, to her family, those she had pushed away, those she had left behind. It wasn't easy. The conversations were awkward, filled with hesitations and unspoken words, but there was something in the effort that made Ariel feel a sense of connection she hadn't experienced in years. She was learning to open up, to let herself feel the weight of what had been lost, and in doing so, she was beginning to understand just how much she had kept hidden from herself. Jonathan continued to be her anchor through it all, his presence steady and unwavering. He didn't push her, didn't demand anything from her. He simply gave her the space to heal, to take her time. And in his quiet support, Ariel began to believe that maybe she could find her way back to the parts of herself she had forgotten. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to live again, to trust again, and to let the ties that bind her to others be the source of strength, rather than pain. It was a quiet afternoon when the call came. Ariel had been sitting on the veranda, the breeze brushing through her hair, staring at the sprawling lawn that seemed endless from where she sat. The world felt still, as if the moment had paused in time, holding its breath. It had been days since she had made the tentative first steps toward reconnecting with her family. Days filled with awkward conversations, hesitant words, and moments of vulnerability that left her feeling exposed and raw. But there was no turning back now. She had opened a door, and though it had been a crack, it was enough to let light in. Jonathan had been a steady presence in her life, but even he had begun to fade into the background as Ariel's focus shifted inward. She had become consumed by the slow, painstaking process of reweaving the threads of her past. It was exhausting work, work that made her feel like she was constantly swimming against the current, but there was something in her that refused to let go of it. Maybe it was the fragile hope Jonathan had given her, or maybe it was simply the desire to find peace within herself. Either way, she was determined. When her phone rang, she didn't recognize the number. Her heart raced, her breath catching for a moment. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her stopped her. She had been waiting for this moment, in a way. It was the moment she had been both dreading and longing for, the moment she would finally hear from the people who had once been her everything. Her family. She took a deep breath before answering. "Hello." There was a brief pause on the other end, and then a familiar voice broke through the silence, sending a shiver down her spine. "Ariel." It was her mother. The sound of her mother's voice hit Ariel like a tidal wave. She hadn't spoken to her in years. In fact, the last time they had exchanged words, it had been bitter, filled with words neither of them could take back. And now, after all this time, here they were, speaking again as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed, hadn't it? Ariel felt a knot tighten in her stomach as emotions she thought she had buried resurfaced, threatening to overwhelm her. "Yes, Mom," Ariel said, her voice steady despite the storm that was raging inside her. "It's me." Her mother's voice faltered, and there was a long, almost painful silence on the other end. "I didn't know where to start, Ariel. I'm not even sure I should have called, but I've been thinking about you. A lot." Ariel closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temple, as if she could somehow will the weight of the conversation away. She had spent so many years avoiding this moment, burying the pain, and now here it was, laid bare before her. "I've missed you, Mom," Ariel said softly, her voice barely a whisper. It was the truth, even if it hurt to admit it. She had missed the connection, the bond they once shared, before everything had fallen apart. Her mother's voice trembled with emotion. "I've missed you too, sweetheart. I've made so many mistakes, and I know I hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know that I've been thinking about you every day. I want to make things right. I don't want to lose you." The words hung in the air like a delicate thread, fragile and yet strong. Ariel's breath caught in her throat. She had been so determined to keep her distance, so sure that the years of separation had been the only way to protect herself from the pain. But now, as her mother spoke, something in her began to shift. She wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive, but she knew that this moment, this conversation, was a step towards something she hadn't dared to hope for in years. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you," Ariel said quietly, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "But I'm willing to try. I don't want to keep living in the past, Mom. I don't want to be angry anymore." Her mother was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with relief. "I understand, darling. I just want a chance to make things right. No matter how long it takes, I'll be here. And I'll wait for you." Ariel's chest tightened as she absorbed her mother's words. It wasn't a promise of immediate reconciliation, but it was something more, a promise of time, of patience, of the possibility of healing. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. "I'll take the time, Mom," Ariel said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I'm not sure what it looks like yet, but I'm willing to see where this can go." "I'll be here," her mother repeated, and Ariel could hear the tears in her voice. "Whenever you're ready." As she hung up the phone, Ariel felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had spent so many years running, avoiding the truth of what had happened, and now, she was standing at the edge of something new. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But it was a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The phone call was a catalyst for something inside her. Ariel felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. She had been afraid of this moment, afraid of letting her guard down, afraid of opening herself to the possibility of love and loss all over again. But now that she had taken the step, now that the words had been spoken, the truth had been laid bare, she realized that there was no going back. She was ready to face what had been broken, and though it terrified her, she was ready to try to mend it. It was late in the evening when Jonathan found her sitting on the veranda again, staring out into the twilight. The fading light cast a soft glow over her face, and when he approached, she looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "I talked to her," Ariel said softly, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "I talked to my mom." Jonathan didn't say anything at first, simply taking a seat beside her, offering his silent support. He didn't need to push. He knew that sometimes, the most important moments were the ones that were unsaid. "I don't know where this is going," she continued, her voice trembling slightly, "but I'm not as scared as I was before. I'm ready to see where it leads. To start again, even if it's just one small step at a time." Jonathan gave her a small, reassuring smile, his hand resting gently on hers. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You're doing just fine. And no matter what happens, I'll be here. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ariel allowed herself to believe him. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that this moment, this fragile beginning, was enough for now. And that was all she needed to take the next step. The days after her conversation with her mother felt like a quiet ripple in the calm of Ariel's life. She had expected to feel overwhelmed, or even burdened, by the emotional weight of what she had just opened herself to. But instead, there was a strange peace settling in, as if the very act of acknowledging her past had unburdened a part of her that she hadn't realized had been carrying so much weight. It wasn't that she had all the answers or that everything had been magically healed. No, it was something more subtle. Something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was finally on the right path. The phone call from her mother had been just the beginning. It was a bridge, built on fragile words and careful gestures, but a bridge nonetheless. Ariel hadn't spoken to her again, but she felt an openness in the air, an invitation for things to move forward. Whether that meant deep conversations or even painful confrontations, she couldn't say. But the door had opened, and that in itself was something she had never thought possible. It was late one afternoon when the unexpected came, an invitation that stirred more confusion than anything else. Ariel was in the garden, tending to the flowers she had planted the previous spring, when her phone buzzed with a new notification. She had grown accustomed to Jonathan's quiet presence around the estate, and she was beginning to notice how much he had become a part of her routine. His absence at that moment was not unusual, but there was something oddly peaceful in the silence. She reached for her phone, expecting another update from her mom or a casual message from a friend, but the name that appeared on her screen made her heart skip a beat. It was from her mother. Ariel hesitated for a moment before opening the message, a feeling of unease settling in her stomach. The text was simple enough. Ariel, I know it's been a long time. I would like to invite you to dinner this weekend. Just us. I understand if you're not ready, but I'd love to see you. Please let me know what you think. Ariel's hands trembled slightly as she read the message again. Dinner. A simple request, but one that carried so much weight. A part of her wanted to say no, wanted to close the door and retreat back into the safety of distance. But another part of her, the part that had been slowly opening up, felt a quiet pull toward the invitation. It was a test, she knew. A test of how far she had come and whether she was truly ready to face the past, face the woman who had given her life but also caused her so much pain. She took a deep breath and set the phone down on the stone bench beside her. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions, fear, uncertainty, hope. She wasn't sure what was right. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what would surely be an emotionally charged dinner, but she also knew she couldn't stay in the same place forever. For years, she had avoided her mother, buried her feelings, convinced herself that distance would protect her. But the truth was, the distance had only made her feel more isolated, more detached from the life she could have had. Her thoughts were interrupted when Jonathan appeared in the garden, his presence quiet yet unmistakable. He had a way of entering a room, or a garden, as it were, with an energy that was neither demanding nor overwhelming. He simply was, and in that stillness, Ariel had come to rely on him. You okay? Jonathan asked, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of distress. Ariel nodded, though the unease still lingered in her chest. She couldn't bring herself to say the words, not yet, but Jonathan had a way of understanding her in ways she hadn't thought possible. He didn't press her, just sat down beside her on the stone bench, waiting. And for a moment, they sat there in silence, the soft rustling of the leaves the only sound between them. Finally, Ariel spoke, her voice barely a whisper. My mom invited me to dinner. This weekend. Jonathan turned to her, his expression neutral but thoughtful. He didn't ask questions right away. He didn't push her. Instead, he simply waited for her to continue. I don't know if I should go, Ariel said, her voice cracking slightly. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. What if I'm not ready to face everything? What if it's too soon? Jonathan's gaze softened. Only you can decide that, Ariel. But I think you already know the answer. You've been trying to run for so long, and now you're standing at the edge of something big. Maybe it's time to stop running. His words hung in the air, and Ariel felt them settle into her chest. They weren't words of pressure, they were words of understanding, of quiet encouragement. She had spent so much of her life running from the people who had hurt her, from the memories that had defined her. But Jonathan was right. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to face the things she had been so afraid of. Ariel turned back to her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed a response to her mother. I'll come. Saturday at 7. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, the weight of the decision settling heavily on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. But there was also no going forward without taking this first step. The next few days passed in a blur. Ariel found herself distracted at every turn, her mind constantly drifting back to the dinner, to the possibility of what might happen. She had never been good at sitting with uncertainty, but that was what she had to do now. She had to sit with the tension, the fear, and the hope, and see where it would take her. Saturday evening arrived too quickly. Ariel stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection with a mixture of dread and anticipation. What was she supposed to wear for such a significant moment? Her mind raced through the options, nothing seemed quite right, nothing seemed to capture the gravity of the occasion. She settled on a simple dress, one that felt neutral enough to say nothing and everything at once. It was a delicate balance, and as she stepped away from the mirror, she felt her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived at her mother's house, the familiar ache of old memories hit her like a wave. The house looked the same, the scent of flowers in the garden just as she remembered. But everything felt different now, every corner, every shadow held the weight of the years that had passed. She rang the doorbell, her breath catching as she waited. Her mother opened the door, her face hesitant but hopeful. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. They simply stood there, looking at each other, as if seeing each other for the first time in years. Ariel's heart ached as she took in the lines on her mother's face, the signs of time and regret. But there was something else too, something softer, something that told Ariel this moment, this dinner, could be the beginning of something new. Ariel, her mother whispered, her voice shaking. Come in. Ariel took a deep breath and stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The house was still. Ariel could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her as she stood in the entryway, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her breath shallow. It was as if time had slowed down, each second stretching out endlessly before her. She had spent so many years avoiding this place, this moment, and now that she was here, standing in front of her mother's door, she wasn't sure what to expect. The house was just as she remembered, filled with the familiar scent of fresh flowers and polished wood. But it felt different now, charged with the tension of all that had happened between them, the things left unsaid. Her mother's gaze, full of cautious hope, met hers as she stepped aside to allow Ariel to enter. It was a simple gesture, but one that held so much meaning. There was no grand display, no overflowing emotions, just a quiet invitation to step into a space that had been too long abandoned. Ariel hesitated for just a moment, her heart pounding in her chest, before she walked through the door. The interior of the house had changed in small ways, freshly painted walls, new furniture, a few extra touches here and there. But it was still the same house. It was still the home she had grown up in, the one where she had learned the warmth of family, and the one where she had felt the sting of betrayal. There were so many memories tied to this place, so many moments that had shaped who she was, who she had become. And yet, here she was, standing in the same living room, unsure of where to go from here. Her mother led her to the dining room, and Ariel followed her, feeling a mixture of anticipation and fear settling in her stomach. The table was set for two, simple, but elegant. A white tablecloth, delicate crystal glasses, and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of intimacy. Ariel couldn't help but notice the careful attention her mother had paid to every detail. It was as if this dinner, this moment, was more than just a meal. It was an offering, a chance to make things right, to rebuild something broken. They sat down across from each other, the silence between them heavy. Ariel could feel her pulse quicken as she picked up her glass of water, her fingers brushing the cool surface, unsure of how to begin. Her mother, too, seemed uncertain. She fidgeted with her napkin, folding and unfolding it, before finally speaking. Ariel, her mother's voice trembled, her eyes downcast. I don't know how to say this, but I've been thinking about you every day. For so many years, I thought I had lost you, and I don't even know how to start fixing it. I know I hurt you. I know I failed you. Ariel took a deep breath, her chest tight. This was the moment where everything could either shatter or begin to heal. She had spent years processing her anger, her hurt, her fear, and now here it was, all laid out before her, raw and exposed. The words she had carried for so long were on the tip of her tongue, but she held them back, choosing instead to listen. I wasn't a good mother to you, Ariel, her mother continued, her voice breaking. I made mistakes. I wasn't there for you when you needed me. I let you down. And I don't know how to fix that, but I want to try. I want to be here for you now. I know it's too late for so many things, but I'm hoping it's not too late for us. Ariel felt her throat tighten, the tears she had been holding back for so long threatening to spill over. She had wanted this. She had wanted her mother to see her pain, to acknowledge what had happened, and yet, hearing her mother's words made it all feel so real, too soon. She had spent so much time running from this, from the memories of a broken relationship, that now, in this moment, she wasn't sure if she could face it all. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft clinking of silverware as the food was served. The meal was simple, but comforting, a homemade chicken dish with roasted vegetables, the smell of garlic and rosemary filling the air. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it didn't need to be. There was no need for extravagance tonight, only honesty, only the attempt to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Ariel picked at her food, the bite of chicken in her mouth feeling oddly heavy. She wasn't sure how to proceed, how to navigate this unfamiliar territory. Everything felt new, and yet everything felt like it was being dredged up from the past. The anger, the hurt, the abandonment, it was all still there, waiting to be addressed. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ariel spoke. Her voice was quiet at first, unsure, but then the words began to spill out, as if they had been waiting to be said for so long. I wanted you to see me, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I wanted you to see me when I was hurting. I wanted you to be there when I needed you the most. But you weren't. You were gone. And that hurt. It hurt more than anything. Her mother's face crumpled, the weight of her daughter's words hitting her like a punch to the gut. I know, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. I wish I could go back and change it, but I can't. I can only ask for your forgiveness now. Ariel felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She needed to process this, to hold on to the fragile thread of hope that had started to weave between them. I don't know if I can forgive you, Ariel said softly, her voice breaking. I don't know if I can just let everything go. It's not that simple. Her mother nodded, her expression filled with regret. I understand. I don't expect that from you. All I want is a chance to show you that I'm here now. That I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Ariel stared at her mother, feeling the weight of everything that had come before, everything that had been left unsaid for so long. She didn't have all the answers, and she certainly didn't know what the future would hold. But there was something in her that told her this dinner, this moment, was important. It was a start. It was a step towards something new, something that had been buried under years of pain and silence. "I don't know what this looks like," Ariel said slowly, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes. I'm willing to see if we can rebuild, whatever it is we've lost." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, Ariel saw something familiar in her eyes, the same love that had been there before everything fell apart. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but it was something real. Something that had been lost, but could be found again. For the rest of the evening, they ate in quiet companionship, the conversation turning to lighter things, family memories, shared moments of laughter, and simple stories of their days. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. A slow, steady progress that neither of them could deny. As Ariel stood to leave, her mother took her hand, her fingers warm and gentle around hers. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Ariel squeezed her mother's hand, her heart swelling with a mixture of emotions she couldn't fully understand yet. "I'm not sure what this means yet," she said softly, "but I'm glad we're here." And with that, Ariel stepped out into the night, the weight of the past still there, but for the first time, not quite so heavy. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Ariel allowed herself to hope. Ariel had not expected the call. After the dinner with her mother, she had tried to immerse herself in the quiet rhythm of her life again. It was a difficult thing, to walk away from such an emotional night, and yet, there was a strange sense of relief. She had opened the door to a possibility she thought she had long since shut, perhaps not completely, but enough to make her feel like she was no longer trapped in the past. The call came late, just as she was settling into bed, a warm cup of chamomile tea by her side, trying to quiet her racing thoughts. She had been thinking about her mother and their conversation, trying to parse through everything that had been said, what was left unsaid, and what lay ahead for them both. The phone's sudden ring shattered the silence, and for a moment, she froze. Who could be calling at this hour? She picked up her phone, her heart fluttering when she saw the name on the screen, Marcus. It had been weeks since she'd last heard from him. They had spoken sporadically after their initial meeting, but after that night at the gallery, things had become strained. Ariel didn't quite know how to feel about him. He was kind, genuine even, but something about the way he looked at her had unsettled her. There was a part of her that wanted to ignore the call, to let it go straight to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of her. She swiped to answer. "Hello?" Ariel said, her voice tinged with hesitation. "Ariel," Marcus's voice sounded strained but warm through the phone. I need to talk to you. Can we meet? It's important." Ariel felt a strange tightness in her chest. Her mind raced, unsure of what this could mean. Why now? She had thought they had cleared the air, that there was no need for further confrontation. But something in his voice made her feel that this was no ordinary conversation. I'm not sure," she replied, the uncertainty clear in her tone. "What's this about?" "I'll explain everything," Marcus said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Please, just trust me. I need to see you. You're the only one who will understand." Ariel paused, conflicted. Part of her wanted to ignore him, after all, she had enough going on with her mother to handle. But another part of her, the part that had felt something shift when they talked, the part that knew there was more beneath the surface with Marcus, felt that this was a conversation she couldn't avoid. She had been avoiding so many things in her life, maybe it was time to stop running. "All right," she said, finally, her voice soft. "Where should we meet?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and Ariel could almost feel the tension in Marcus's hesitation. "How about the park? The one near your place? In the morning?" "Okay. I'll be there," Ariel agreed, and they ended the call. She set the phone down, feeling a swirl of emotions take over. What was this about? Why did he sound so serious? And why, despite her reservations, did she feel an unsettling pull to figure it out? The next morning, as Ariel dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, she found herself unable to shake the anxiety that had taken root. She had spent the night tossing and turning, her mind racing with endless possibilities of what Marcus might need to tell her. She had been so focused on her relationship with her mother, on healing wounds she thought were beyond repair, that she hadn't even considered what had been brewing beneath the surface with Marcus. The air was crisp as Ariel walked to the park, the golden light of the morning sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The familiar park, with its winding paths and scattered benches, felt strangely unfamiliar in this context. She had walked here many times before, had passed by its quiet serenity countless times without a second thought. Now, as she approached the meeting spot, she couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Marcus was already there, standing by one of the benches. His posture was tense, his hands in his pockets as he stared off into the distance. As Ariel approached, she could tell he was deep in thought, his mind weighed down by something he hadn't yet shared. "Marcus," she called out, her voice hesitant. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. There was a moment of silence as he studied her, and then he gave a small, tight smile. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice low. Ariel stood in front of him, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes searching his face for any hint of what was going on. "What's this all about?" she asked, unable to mask the frustration in her tone. "You asked me to meet you here, said it was important, and you're not even explaining why." Marcus exhaled sharply, his breath visible in the cold morning air. "I didn't know how else to say this, but I've been holding something back. Something important. And it's been eating at me." Ariel frowned. "What are you talking about?" He paused, looking away for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then, he finally spoke, his voice tight with emotion. "Ariel, the reason I asked you to meet me, the reason I've been so distant lately, is because I've been lying to you." Ariel's stomach dropped at the words. Lying to her? She felt the anger begin to rise, but before she could say anything, Marcus continued. "It's not that I wanted to lie to you," he said quickly, his voice cracking. "It's just that I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I didn't know how to say it without hurting you. I care about you, Ariel. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone, and I should have told you sooner. But I was afraid." Her mind was racing now, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she were afraid to hear the truth. Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "Ariel, I'm not who you think I am." The words hung in the air between them, a heavy silence falling over the park as Ariel waited for him to explain. "I'm not just a regular guy," Marcus continued, his voice filled with vulnerability. I'm someone who has connections, someone who's been involved in things I shouldn't have. I didn't want you to know about it. I didn't want you to think I was just like everyone else, using people for my own benefit." Ariel blinked, the shock setting in. "Wait, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've been trying to escape that life," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been trying to leave it all behind, to build something real. With you. But now everything's caught up with me. And I'm afraid of what that might mean for you." Ariel stared at him, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to say. She had thought that this was going to be a simple conversation, something to clear the air. But now, everything had changed. She had no idea what kind of man Marcus truly was, and the weight of that knowledge threatened to pull her under. The park, once serene, now felt like a battleground, and Ariel realized that everything she thought she knew, about him, about herself, was about to be turned upside down. Ariel stood frozen for a moment, her mind spinning as Marcus's words hung in the air between them like an invisible storm cloud. She had asked for honesty, but not like this. She had asked for clarity, for answers that would put her restless heart at ease, but instead, she was left grappling with a truth that seemed more like a riddle wrapped in shadows. "Wait, are you saying you've been lying to me this whole time?" Ariel's voice broke the silence, and she felt the anger bubble up from her chest. "For how long? About who you really are?" Marcus flinched, clearly pained by the accusation, but there was something in his eyes, something raw, that told Ariel this wasn't the whole story. It wasn't a simple case of deceit. There was more, far more, lurking beneath the surface. "I never wanted to lie to you, Ariel," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with how to explain himself. "But everything I've done, everything I've been involved with, it's not who I am anymore. It's in my past. I swear." Ariel felt a chill creep up her spine. The way he was looking at her, the intensity in his gaze, was almost too much to bear. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the guilt that seemed to weigh him down. But did she believe him? Could she believe him? She crossed her arms tightly, trying to steady herself. "How can I believe you, Marcus? You've been hiding things from me. You've been keeping secrets, things you never told me. You think you can just tell me one thing now and make it all go away?" He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, his expression was one of vulnerability, a look that felt almost foreign on him. "I don't expect you to forgive me, not yet. I don't expect you to understand. But I need you to know, what I did, who I was, that's not who I am now. I've been trying to distance myself from it all, but the past keeps coming back. And now it's threatening everything I've been trying to build with you." Ariel swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She had never expected this, never imagined the man standing before her could be anything but the kind-hearted, thoughtful person she had come to care for. She had trusted him, in ways she hadn't trusted anyone in years. And now, it felt like that trust was being ripped from her, piece by piece, like fragile paper caught in the wind. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question felt like it was burning her from the inside out. Why wait until now? Why not before it all got so complicated? Marcus stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because I didn't want to lose you, Ariel. I didn't want to bring you into that world. I thought if I kept it buried, if I just focused on us, on building something real, maybe it could work. But now, it's not that simple anymore. I can't run from my past forever." She took a step back, instinctively putting more distance between them, as if trying to create some physical space to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions crashing inside her. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a revelation. A revelation that shattered everything she thought she knew about Marcus, and perhaps even about herself. The silence between them stretched out, thick and heavy. The park, which had seemed like such a safe place before, now felt suffocating. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees, but even that soft sound felt too loud in the oppressive quiet. Ariel's mind was racing, trying to process it all. She wanted to understand, wanted to believe Marcus and the sincerity in his voice. But the fear, the uncertainty, was like an anchor dragging her down into the depths of doubt. "What kind of past are we talking about here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the calm front she was trying to maintain. "What exactly do you mean?" Marcus hesitated, his gaze faltering for just a moment. "I was involved with some people, Ariel. People who, let's just say, they don't exactly play by the rules. I was part of things I'm not proud of. I've done things I regret, things I can't undo. But I've been trying to change. I swear I have." The words felt heavy, like they carried the weight of all the secrets Marcus had been keeping locked away. And as Ariel stood there, absorbing his confession, a part of her felt like the ground beneath her feet was shifting. The person she thought she knew, her Marcus, was now a stranger. Ariel felt the bile of fear rise in her throat. She could see it now, clearer than ever. The shadow of his past wasn't something he could easily escape. It wasn't something that would go away just because he had decided to leave it behind. The danger of it, the people, the circumstances, would always be lurking. She wasn't just afraid for herself now, she was afraid for him. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know any of this. How am I supposed to trust you now? How am I supposed to know this is real? That you're real?" Marcus's face tightened in agony. "I know you have every right to be angry, Ariel. I know I don't deserve your trust right now. But if you just give me a chance, if you just let me show you, I'll prove it to you. I'll prove that I've changed, that I'm not the same person I was back then." Her heart was racing, a knot of emotions tightening in her chest. The fear, the anger, the sadness, they all swirled together in a hurricane that she couldn't escape. She wanted to scream at him, tell him to leave, to go back to the life he had come from and let her live hers in peace. But a small part of her, the part that had seen glimpses of goodness in him, the part that had let herself care for him, wanted to believe that he could change. But could she live with the uncertainty? Could she live with the constant fear of his past catching up with him, with the danger looming over everything? "I don't know what to do with this," she said, the words coming out in a strangled whisper. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can be part of a life that's so tangled up in secrets." Marcus's eyes softened, and for a moment, it felt like he truly understood the weight of what she was carrying. "I never wanted this for you, Ariel. I never wanted to drag you into my mess. But if you can't be with me because of my past, then maybe it's better this way. Maybe I'm not the man you thought I was, and maybe you deserve more than someone like me can give." Ariel's heart twisted at the words, and she closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions threatening to drown her. She hadn't expected this moment to come. She hadn't expected to have to face this kind of decision, whether to let go of the man she had come to care about or hold on and hope that he could truly change. But in this moment, standing in the quiet of the park with Marcus, she realized that nothing in life was simple. No relationship was ever without its challenges. But this was a test she wasn't sure she was ready for. Ariel couldn't remember the last time she had felt so lost. The cold bite of the evening air nipped at her skin as she walked down the city streets, aimlessly, trying to clear her mind, trying to find a way to make sense of the chaos that had erupted in her life over the past week. Marcus's words echoed in her ears like a constant drumbeat, and the more she replayed them, the more fragmented everything seemed. She had trusted him, truly trusted him, and in return, he had shown her a side of himself she had never imagined existed. The truth of his past, the darkness he had been involved in, had shattered the image she had so carefully built of him in her mind. And now, no matter how hard she tried to cling to the pieces of what they had, it all felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Marcus. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly pushed it aside. She wasn't ready to talk to him, not yet. Not until she had figured things out for herself. She tucked the phone back into her bag and kept walking, her steps slow and deliberate as if the pace could help her think more clearly. But her mind was a mess. She kept coming back to one question: was she being foolish for even considering giving him another chance? The truth was, she had never been in a situation like this before. She had always been cautious with her heart, always guarded. It wasn't just Marcus's past that was throwing her into turmoil, it was the sheer weight of the decision she was facing. If she stayed with him, would she be constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop? Or, if she walked away, would she forever regret not taking a chance on him? Could love really overcome everything? "Hey, Ariel." The voice cut through her thoughts, and she turned to see her best friend, Jenna, jogging up to her, a look of concern etched across her face. "What's going on? I've been trying to reach you all day. You've been MIA." Ariel forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've just been thinking," she said, her voice lacking the usual enthusiasm. "I guess I needed some space." Jenna raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying the explanation. "Thinking? You've been gone for hours. I know you, girl. Something's up." "What happened?" Ariel sighed, feeling the familiar weight of her emotions press down on her once more. She leaned against a nearby lamppost, trying to steady herself. "It's Marcus." Jenna nodded knowingly. "I figured. So, what's going on? You two were doing so well." Ariel's heart tightened as she glanced up at the night sky, her thoughts momentarily drifting. "It's his past, Jenna. He lied to me about everything, about who he was and what he was involved in before we met. I thought I knew him, but it turns out, I didn't. And now, I don't know if I can trust him again." Jenna stepped closer, her expression softening. "I'm sorry, Ariel. That's a huge blow. I can't imagine what you're going through." "I don't even know what to think anymore," Ariel admitted, shaking her head in frustration. "I want to believe him. I want to believe that the man I care about now is who he says he is. But his past, it's like this dark cloud hanging over everything. I don't know if I can live with that." Jenna took a deep breath, her gaze thoughtful as she considered Ariel's words. "I get it. It's not easy to just let something like that go. But here's the thing, Ariel, people change. They make mistakes, sure, but they can also grow and become better. The real question is, do you believe in him enough to let him prove that he's different now?" Ariel closed her eyes, her chest tightening. "I don't know. Part of me wants to fight for us, but I'm terrified. What if I'm just setting myself up for more heartache?" Jenna placed a hand on her shoulder, offering the kind of support only a true friend could. "Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. But I think you need to ask yourself what you truly want. Not what anyone else thinks you should do, but what feels right for you. You've been strong through so much. Don't let fear make the decision for you." Ariel nodded, the weight of Jenna's words sinking in. She had always prided herself on her ability to make decisions for herself, to trust her instincts. But this was different. This was love, and love, especially the kind that came with so many complications, was never clear-cut. After a long pause, Ariel spoke again, her voice quieter now, as if she was coming to some kind of resolution. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive him. But I think I need to talk to him. I need to hear him out one more time, fully. And then, I'll decide what to do." Jenna smiled warmly, giving her friend's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "That's the first step, Ariel. Don't rush it. You've got this." That evening, Ariel returned home and found herself standing in front of the door to Marcus's apartment. She had spent hours walking around the city, trying to clear her mind, but now she was here, facing the very man who had thrown her life into disarray. The man she still couldn't quite bring herself to forget. She stood there for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorbell, her heart racing. She had no idea what would happen next. She didn't know if Marcus would have the answers she was searching for or if the conversation would only make things worse. But she knew one thing for sure, she couldn't move forward until she confronted him face to face. Taking a deep breath, Ariel pressed the doorbell. A few moments later, the door opened, and there he was, looking just as he always did, handsome, warm, and impossibly familiar. But today, there was something different about him. His eyes, usually so confident, were clouded with uncertainty. "Ariel," his voice was strained, as if he had been holding his breath, waiting for her to come. "I need to talk," she said, her voice steady but soft. She stepped past him, entering the apartment without waiting for an invitation. It was clear now, there was no turning back. They had to face whatever was between them, once and for all. Marcus closed the door behind her, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Ariel felt the weight of the silence pressing down on them, but it wasn't just the awkwardness of the moment. It was the tension of the truth, of what they both knew had to be said. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Ariel, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Please, just give me the chance." Ariel's heart clenched at the raw emotion in his voice, but she was resolute. "We need to be honest with each other. Completely honest. No more secrets, Marcus." He nodded, his face a mixture of guilt and hope. "I'll tell you everything. Everything you need to know." And in that moment, as they stood on the precipice of something unknown, Ariel realized that this wasn't just about Marcus's past anymore. This was about their future. And whether or not they could build it together. The air inside Marcus's apartment felt thick, suffocating, as Ariel sat across from him. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a drum of tension. This was it. This was the moment when everything would either fall apart or start to rebuild. She had spent the last few days agonizing over what to do, but now that she was here, the decision felt even heavier. Marcus was standing by the window, his back to her, his hand resting on the glass as he stared out into the city below. His posture was tense, as if every muscle in his body was coiled with the pressure of what was to come. Ariel felt a pang of sympathy for him, but she quickly pushed it aside. She needed answers. She deserved answers. "Ariel," his voice was soft, almost fragile, as he turned to face her. His eyes were filled with regret, the weight of everything they had been through clearly taking its toll on him. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I've been lying to you, hiding things from you, and I'm sorry. But you have to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen." Ariel swallowed, trying to steady her breathing. "I don't know what to think anymore, Marcus. Everything we've shared, everything we've built together, was it all just a lie?" Marcus shook his head vehemently, stepping closer to her. "No. It wasn't a lie. I swear to you, Ariel. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. But the truth is," he paused, as if struggling with the words, and when he finally spoke again, it was almost a whisper. "The truth is that I've been running from my past for so long, I didn't know how to face it. I didn't know how to let you in. I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd walk away. And I couldn't lose you." Ariel's heart skipped a beat, the rawness of his confession hitting her harder than she had expected. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him, but the fragments of his past still loomed in the background like a shadow, making it hard to see the truth through the murk of his secrets. "Then tell me, Marcus," she said, her voice steady but demanding. "Tell me what you've been hiding. I deserve to know. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when I have no idea what's really going on." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself, before he finally took a deep breath and began to speak. "I was involved in some bad things, Ariel," he started, his voice tight. "Things I regret every single day. Before I came to New York, I was mixed up with the wrong people. I was part of a group that ran scams, pushed illegal deals, and," he paused, his face twisting with the shame of his words. "We were bad, Ariel. Really bad. But I got out. I made a choice to leave it all behind. I moved to New York with the hope of starting fresh, of being someone different. And for the most part, I have been. But there are people from my past who don't just let you walk away. And they've been making sure that I don't forget what I used to be." Ariel's mind raced as she processed his words. He wasn't just hiding a few mistakes, he had been involved in something dangerous, something far darker than she had imagined. Her mind flashed back to the first time she had met him, how he had seemed so polished, so put together. The Marcus she knew had been charming, intelligent, kind. But the man standing before her now, revealing his past, felt like a stranger in some ways. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth?" Marcus lowered his gaze, regret flooding his face. Because I was ashamed. I thought I could leave that part of me behind, that I could keep it in the past where it belonged. I didn't want to bring it into our lives, Ariel. I didn't want it to poison what we had. But I see now that hiding it from you only made things worse. Ariel sat there, her mind in a whirlwind of confusion. She had always prided herself on her ability to see through people, to know when someone was hiding something. And yet, Marcus had kept this from her for so long. She had trusted him, opened up to him in ways she hadn't done with anyone else, and now, that trust felt like it had been shattered. I don't know if I can just forget all of this, Marcus, she said, her voice quivering with the weight of her emotions. How do I move past something like this? How do I go back to the way things were? Marcus's face fell, and for a moment, Ariel thought he might say something to try to convince her to stay, to tell her that everything would be okay. But instead, he just shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Ariel. I know that I've broken your trust, and that's something I can never take back. But I need you to know that I'm trying to change. I want to be the man you deserve. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you. Ariel stared at him, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but how could she be sure? How could she know that this wasn't just another lie, another attempt to cover up the truth? I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice full of pain. I love you, Marcus. I really do. But I'm scared. I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can live with the fear of your past always coming back to haunt us. There was silence between them, a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to stretch on forever. And in that silence, Ariel realized something. She had been living in fear, fear of Marcus's past, fear of what could happen, fear of what might have been. But the truth was, she was just as afraid of losing him. The thought of walking away from him, of letting him go without knowing if they could have a future together, was terrifying in its own right. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I don't expect you to have all the answers, Ariel. But if you can't trust me now, then maybe we need to take a step back. Maybe we need to give ourselves some time to figure out if we can rebuild what we've lost. Ariel felt her heart clench at his words, but she knew he was right. They couldn't keep going in circles, trapped in the uncertainty of their situation. They needed to either move forward or let go. But in that moment, she wasn't sure she was ready to say goodbye. Maybe that's what we need, she said softly, her voice trembling. Time. To think. To figure out what we really want. But I can't promise anything, Marcus. I can't promise that we'll make it through this. Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. I understand. But I'll be here. Whenever you're ready. As Ariel stood up to leave, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she was making, she knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. But it was the beginning of something else, something that could either bring them back together or tear them apart for good. The days following that painful conversation with Marcus were a blur for Ariel. Each morning, she woke up with the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily on her chest. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt cold and hollow. Even the faintest echo of the city outside seemed to mock her, reminding her of the world she had so carefully built. And how easily it could come crashing down. Ariel had spent hours walking the streets of the city, her feet carrying her to places she had long ignored. She visited the small cafe where she used to write, the park bench where she and Marcus had shared their first kiss, and even the little bookstore that had once been her refuge. Everywhere she went, memories flooded back. Her mind replayed their laughter, their conversations, and the soft, gentle moments they had shared in between the chaos of their lives. But with each memory, a dark shadow crept in, his lies, his secrets, the things he hadn't told her. And with it, came the unbearable question, could she forgive him? Could she move past everything he had kept hidden? She spent hours grappling with the truth, trying to make sense of her feelings. Marcus had hurt her, yes. He had kept things from her. But did that mean she had to walk away from the love they had? Did it mean their entire relationship had been a lie? Her heart told her one thing, but her head, her sense of self-preservation, told her another. It was a battle between love and logic, between forgiveness and self-respect. Late one afternoon, as she sat on a bench in the park, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Marcus. Her heart skipped a beat as she read it. "I'm thinking of you. I know you need space, but I'm here whenever you're ready. I'll wait." Ariel felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to reply, to tell him that she missed him, that she wanted to see him again. But another part of her feared that if she let him back in too soon, she would only be repeating the same mistakes. She had been hurt before, and the thought of allowing herself to be vulnerable again was terrifying. She took a deep breath, pushing the phone aside, and decided it was time to stop running. Time to face the uncertainty, the fear, the anger, head on. She needed to know if there was a way forward for them, or if this was a chapter of her life that needed to be closed for good. The next morning, Ariel stood outside Marcus's building. The street was quiet, the air crisp with the bite of early autumn. She had made her decision. No more waiting. No more hiding. She needed to see him. They both did. Marcus opened the door to her knock, his face lighting up with relief when he saw her standing there. But as he moved to embrace her, Ariel gently stepped back, holding up her hand in a gesture of caution. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice steady despite the storm swirling in her chest. "I don't know if I can just forget everything, Marcus. I don't know if I can just move past your past." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But what I do know is that I can't keep running from it either. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine, when I know it's not." Marcus's expression shifted, the hope in his eyes turning into something more guarded, more vulnerable. He nodded slowly, as if he understood the weight of her words. "I never expected you to just forgive me," he said quietly. "I know I've asked a lot of you. And I'm not here to make excuses for my past. All I want is a chance to show you that I can be better. That I can be the man you deserve." Ariel's heart twisted. It wasn't just his words that affected her, it was the raw sincerity in his voice, the way his vulnerability matched her own. But still, there were so many unanswered questions, so many doubts lingering like shadows in her mind. "How do I know I can trust you again, Marcus? How do I know that you won't hide things from me again?" The silence between them stretched on, both of them caught in the whirlwind of their emotions. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice firm but soft. "You don't. You'll never know for sure. But I can promise you this, I'll do whatever it takes to earn that trust back. And if you're willing to try, I'll be here every step of the way. I won't give up on us. Not now, not ever." Ariel felt her heart crack at his words. The part of her that had been so afraid to forgive, so afraid to open herself up to him again, started to soften. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take that step, but she knew she couldn't keep living in this limbo. She had to make a choice. "Then show me," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Show me that you're different. Show me that I can trust you." Marcus took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and for a moment, they just stood there, gazing at each other. His hand reached out, tentative at first, as if asking permission. Ariel nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. As his hand touched hers, something inside her stirred, something she had almost forgotten was there. Hope. The faintest glimmer of hope. "I will," he whispered. "I promise." They stood there for a few moments longer, both of them absorbing the gravity of their words. The uncertainty still lingered in the air, but it wasn't as heavy as before. It was as if they had finally reached an unspoken understanding, that they could no longer keep living in fear of the past, but neither could they pretend that everything was fine. They would have to build trust again, brick by brick, and it wouldn't be easy. But at least they were willing to try. Later that evening, as they sat together in the quiet of Marcus's apartment, Ariel found herself lost in thought. She wasn't sure what the future held for them, but she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. She had finally taken the first step toward forgiveness, toward understanding. And for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of peace. But just as the tension between them began to ease, a knock at the door broke the moment. It was sharp and insistent. Ariel froze, her hand tightening around the mug in her lap. Marcus's face went pale as he stood up, his eyes darting toward the door. "I'll get it," he said, his voice tense. As he opened the door, Ariel's stomach dropped. Standing in the doorway was someone she never thought she'd see again. Ariel's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the figure before her. Ariel's heart raced as the figure in the doorway stood frozen. Her gaze flickered from Marcus to the stranger, trying to make sense of the moment. There was something about the way the stranger stood there, confident but almost apologetic, that immediately set her on edge. She had only seen that look once before in her life, the look of someone who had come to unsettle the fragile peace of another's world. Marcus's face had drained of color, and his lips parted slightly, as if he didn't know how to form words. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of them spoke. Ariel's stomach churned with a mix of confusion and anxiety. Who was this person? And why did their appearance seem to hit Marcus like a sudden blow? "Marcus," the stranger said softly, his voice low but unmistakably familiar. The man was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, but it wasn't his appearance that made Ariel's pulse quicken. It was the way Marcus's body stiffened, the way his shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of years of guilt and regret. The stranger stepped forward, his eyes meeting Ariel's with a kind of knowing calm. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I should have called first, but I didn't know how else to." Marcus quickly stepped between the two of them, cutting off whatever the stranger was about to say. His voice was tight, laced with a forced calm. "What are you doing here, Alex?" The name rang through the room like an ominous echo. Alex. Ariel's mind scrambled, trying to place it, to make sense of the connection. She had never heard of this Alex before, and the way Marcus was reacting, so unexpectedly tense, left her breathless. "I need to talk to you," Alex said, his gaze flicking over to Ariel for just a brief second, then back to Marcus. "It's important. It's about the past, and about her." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Ariel's breath caught in her throat as her mind raced. Her. Who was Alex talking about? And why did it feel like Marcus was hiding something much deeper than just a simple secret? Ariel opened her mouth to speak, but the words failed her. Instead, she stood frozen in place, her mind spinning with the weight of the revelation that she hadn't even known she needed. What had Marcus been keeping from her? And who was this person, this Alex, who seemed to know more than he was letting on? Marcus's hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles turning white. "I don't want to talk about this now, Alex," he said, his voice dangerously controlled. "Not here, not like this." But Alex didn't back down. He stepped forward again, his expression hardening. "It's not just about you anymore. You can't keep hiding it, Marcus. She deserves to know the truth." Ariel's heart raced, and her stomach twisted in knots. The truth. What truth? What was it that Marcus had been hiding from her for all this time? She could feel the sharp sting of betrayal, even though no one had said a word about the specifics yet. "Please," Alex continued, his voice softer now. "You don't have to do this alone. Let her in. Let her understand what's going on. You owe her that much." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. Marcus stood still, his eyes averted, his lips pressed into a thin line as if weighing the decision. Ariel's mind raced, trying to process everything, trying to make sense of the swirling emotions and questions that were suddenly so overwhelming. Why was Marcus keeping secrets? Why was it so hard for him to be open with her? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus spoke again, his voice quiet but strained. Ariel, you deserve to know everything. I never wanted you to be dragged into this. But this, he gestured between them, at Alex, at the air that had thickened with secrets. This isn't just my past anymore. It's about all of us. I should have told you a long time ago. Ariel's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she looked at him, her gaze steady, unwavering. Then tell me, she said, her voice low but firm. Tell me what it is you've been hiding, Marcus. I can't stand this. I can't keep pretending like everything is okay when I know it's not. I deserve to know. We've been through enough. Marcus's shoulders sagged, as though the weight of his own words was finally sinking in. He glanced at Alex, then back at Ariel, and for a moment, she thought he might turn away, might retreat into the safety of silence. But then, in a quiet voice that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of regret, he spoke. I used to be in love with someone else, he began. His words were blunt, direct, and they hit Ariel like a physical blow. She stumbled back slightly, not expecting the rawness of his confession. Before we met, I was involved with someone I thought I was going to marry. But it didn't work out. She wasn't who I thought she was. And that's part of the reason I ran away from her, ran away from everything. It was easier to leave than to face the truth of what happened between us. Ariel felt a chill spread through her. The air in the room seemed to freeze, and her mind couldn't seem to catch up to the reality of what Marcus had just admitted. So, you're telling me you were involved with someone else, before me? Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Marcus closed his eyes, as if bracing himself for the storm he knew was coming. I didn't want you to think I was lying to you. I didn't want you to think I was keeping something from you. But I was afraid. Afraid that if I told you, you'd leave me. I thought if I could keep my past locked away, we could build something real, something that didn't have all the baggage. Ariel's heart ached, the pain of betrayal bubbling up again. So you thought hiding it would protect me? You thought keeping me in the dark would make everything better? He looked at her then, his eyes filled with regret. I never meant to hurt you, Ariel. I didn't want to lie to you, but I didn't know how to fix the mess I had made. Ariel stood there for a long moment, her thoughts swirling in a tornado of confusion and hurt. She had known something was off, but she hadn't expected this. She had thought their love was enough to overcome anything, but now, standing in the face of this truth, she didn't know if that was enough. Could love really fix everything? Before she could say anything more, Alex stepped forward, his voice steady. There's more, Ariel. Marcus isn't the only one with a past that needs to be dealt with. Her gaze snapped to him, startled. What do you mean? Alex hesitated, then looked between Marcus and Ariel before answering. The woman Marcus was involved with, she's back in town. And she wants him back. The weight of Alex's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. Ariel stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest as the world around her seemed to spin. She's back. She wants him back. The truth hit like a wave crashing over her, drowning her in a flood of emotions she couldn't quite grasp. For a moment, the room was eerily silent. Marcus's eyes flickered between Alex and Ariel, as if searching for the right words, but there was nothing left to say. His past had come crashing into their present, and the cracks that had started to form in their relationship were now fissures, threatening to break everything apart. Ariel's mind raced. How had she not seen it? How had she not known that there was more to Marcus's past than what he had told her? All the signs, the subtle hesitations in his voice, the guarded way he'd reacted whenever anything related to his past came up, it all made sense now. He had been hiding this, keeping it from her, and for what? To protect her? To protect himself? The question felt like a knife in her gut. Could she even trust him now? She swallowed hard, trying to fight back the tears that threatened to spill over. "So, you've been keeping all of this from me?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "All this time, Marcus, you've been lying to me. Telling me that everything was fine, that we were building something real, when all along, you were hiding a whole part of yourself from me." Marcus opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. His face was pale, his eyes haunted, as if he were caught between two worlds, the past he couldn't escape and the future he wanted with Ariel. But no matter how hard he tried to reach for her, the gap between them seemed insurmountable. Alex watched the exchange in silence, but there was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. Ariel could tell that he wasn't here to make things worse, he wasn't here to take sides, but that didn't make it any easier. The truth was out in the open, and now the choices they all had to make would define the course of everything. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Marcus finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I kept it buried, we could move forward. I thought I could leave that part of my life behind, but it's never really gone. And now you know." Ariel took a step back, her chest tightening with a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Marcus. How am I supposed to trust you when you've kept this from me for so long? You've been lying to me, and all I wanted was the truth." Marcus's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and Ariel could see the weight of his regret pressing down on him. She had never seen him like this before. Vulnerable, broken. And yet, despite everything, the anger and hurt she felt inside made it difficult for her to even look at him. "I didn't want to lose you," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "I thought if you knew the truth, it would push you away. But I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have told you everything from the beginning." Ariel's breath hitched in her throat. "He should have told me everything." The words echoed in her mind, and with them came a flood of memories, of their late-night talks, of the laughter they'd shared, the moments when everything had felt so perfect. But now it felt like those moments had been built on a lie. How could she reconcile the man she thought she knew with the man standing before her now? "I don't know what to do, Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this. For hiding this from me. For keeping me in the dark." Marcus's eyes burned with desperation as he reached out toward her, but Ariel stepped back, not wanting to feel the warmth of his touch when it felt like it had been tainted by so much secrecy. "Please, Ariel," he pleaded. "I need you to understand. This woman, the one I was involved with, it was a long time ago. It didn't mean anything. But I never got closure. I thought I was moving on, but now she's back, and I don't know what that means for us. But I swear to you, I don't want her. I never did. Not like I want you." Ariel's heart ached at his words, but the pain only made her confusion deeper. How could I trust him? She thought. How could I believe that the love we had built was real if everything was a lie? Before she could respond, Alex stepped forward, breaking the silence that had settled like a heavy fog. "Ariel," he said gently, his voice laced with caution. "I know this isn't easy to hear. I know it feels like everything is falling apart, but I need you to know something. Marcus didn't just keep this from you to protect himself. He was protecting you, too. There's a reason this woman is back, and it's not because Marcus wants her. It's because she's a part of a much bigger picture, something that could destroy everything he's built, including you." Ariel turned her gaze to Alex, her mind whirling. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alex hesitated, glancing at Marcus before continuing. "The woman Marcus was involved with before, her name is Chloe. She's not just anyone. She's part of a larger story, a story that's been haunting Marcus for years. The reason she's back isn't because she wants him. It's because she wants revenge. And if Marcus doesn't deal with it, if he doesn't face her now, it could all come crashing down. Everything he's worked for. Everything you've built together." Ariel felt a chill sweep over her as the words sank in. Revenge? What could Chloe possibly want from Marcus now, after all this time? And how could that affect her? I don't understand, she said, her voice growing more frantic. How could this woman's return affect us? What kind of revenge are we talking about? Marcus took a deep breath, his face contorted with the weight of the truth he hadn't yet shared. It's not just about Chloe, Ariel. It's about what she knows. About what she could destroy if she wanted to. If I don't handle this, if I don't make things right with her, it's not just my past that will haunt us. It's our future. Ariel stared at him, her mind racing. The pieces were finally starting to come together, but the more she learned, the more questions kept piling up. What did Chloe know? And why was Marcus still so terrified of her, so caught up in a past that was long gone? Marcus's voice broke through her thoughts. Ariel, please. I need you to trust me. I've never wanted to hurt you, but I need to fix this. I need to make sure that the past doesn't destroy us. Ariel took a deep breath, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She didn't know what the future held, and she didn't know if she could forgive Marcus for the secrets he'd kept. But one thing was clear, the storm that had come to their door was far from over, and no matter how hard she tried to hold on to the love they'd shared, the truth had a way of shattering everything. The world seemed to slow down as Ariel stood in the middle of Marcus's luxurious apartment, her heart a battleground between the love she still felt for him and the overwhelming betrayal that was now a part of their history. She had come so far with him, fought so hard for their love, but the truth had a way of fracturing everything that once seemed so certain. Marcus stood across from her, his eyes heavy with regret, pleading silently for her understanding. Ariel couldn't tear her gaze away from him. It wasn't just that he'd kept secrets, that he had kept a part of himself hidden from her for so long, it was the uncertainty that had crept in, the cracks that had appeared in their foundation. Could I really forgive him? Could I move past this? These questions tore at her, and every moment of silence between them seemed to stretch out forever. I know I've hurt you, Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. But I swear to you, Ariel, I've never stopped loving you. The past doesn't matter anymore, not with you. Please believe me when I say that I would never do anything to risk what we have. Ariel closed her eyes, fighting the swell of emotion that threatened to overcome her. She wanted to believe him, so badly, but the storm of doubt inside her wouldn't let up. The past always catches up, doesn't it? Her mind raced, replaying everything Alex had said. There was more to the story. Chloe wasn't just a blast from Marcus's past, she was a specter, a threat. A threat that had returned at the worst possible moment, threatening everything they had worked for. Ariel clenched her fists, trying to regain some control over her emotions. It was as if the universe had conspired to make everything more complicated, to pull her deeper into a maze of lies, truths, and unspoken fears. You don't understand, Marcus continued, his voice cracking. I thought if I kept this all buried, it would stay there, that we could move on, that you and I could build something real. But it's not that simple. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to drag you into this nightmare. But now you're here, and it's my fault. I'll fix it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Ariel's gaze sharpened as she looked up at him, her heart filled with an aching clarity. Fix it? How can you fix something that's already broken, Marcus? How can you undo the damage of hiding the truth from me? You made your choice when you decided to keep me in the dark. She wasn't yelling, wasn't screaming. Instead, her voice was calm, composed, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, each one hanging like a question mark. Marcus's face twisted with pain, but he didn't argue. He knew. He had known all along that the road back to her wouldn't be easy. He had expected this, feared it, but now that it was happening, it was more than he could bear. I was wrong, he said, his voice barely audible. I was so afraid of losing you that I kept everything from you, and in doing so, I hurt you in ways I never meant to. I thought if I could shield you from my past, we could have a future, but the past doesn't stay hidden. It never does. And now Chloe is back, and everything I've tried to keep buried is resurfacing. Ariel shook her head, the sting of his words cutting deeper than she had anticipated. She had never been so unsure of anything in her life. She had always believed in love, truly believed it could conquer anything. But this? This was different. This felt like something she wasn't sure she could ever come back from. You say you'll fix it, Marcus, Ariel said slowly, her words cutting through the thick silence like a knife. But the truth is, I don't know if you can. You can't change what's already been done. You can't change what's already been broken between us. The words felt like they came from somewhere deep inside, a place that had been wounded and scarred by the things she had learned in the last few days. But as much as it hurt to admit, it was the truth. The love they had once shared felt distant now, like something unreachable, slipping through her fingers. Marcus's eyes were filled with despair, his shoulders slumped in defeat as he stepped closer, though he didn't dare touch her. Ariel, please. Don't walk away from us. Don't let this ruin everything we've had together. I can't lose you, not after everything we've built. Ariel took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with the weight of the decision she knew she had to make. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight against the feelings that were tearing her apart, but instead, she stood still, trying to calm the storm inside her. The woman in her wanted to run, to leave, to walk away from the man who had betrayed her trust so completely. But the love she felt for him, the love that had once seemed so perfect, so absolute, still lingered, holding her in place. I don't know if I can do this, Marcus, she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. I don't know if I can stay and pretend that nothing has changed. Because everything has changed. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again. The words hung in the air, each one landing like a blow. Ariel could feel the heaviness of the moment, the finality of it. And yet, despite everything, there was something in her heart, a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. Please, Marcus pleaded again, his voice breaking. I'll fix this, I swear. I'll take care of Chloe. I'll do whatever it takes. I can't lose you, Ariel. Ariel looked at him, her mind racing. She had a choice to make. She could walk away, turn her back on the man she loved and move forward, trying to rebuild her life. Or she could stay and try to work through the mess he had created, hoping against hope that they could salvage something. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders like an anchor, pulling her deeper into uncertainty. But in that moment, she realized something. It wasn't about forgiving Marcus right away. It wasn't about trusting him again in the next instant. It was about choosing to fight for the future she wanted, for the possibility of healing, together, or apart. She took a long, steadying breath and looked up at him. I can't promise that everything will go back to the way it was. I can't promise that I'll forgive you overnight, but I'll stay. I'll stay if you promise me one thing, that you'll do everything in your power to protect us, to protect me from this woman. I need to know that you're not just trying to fix things for yourself. I need to know that you're doing this for us. Marcus's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since they'd started this painful conversation, Ariel saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't just regret, but raw, desperate hope. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes. Ariel nodded slowly, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. It's not over yet, she thought. There's still a chance. And with that, they both stepped into the uncertain future, holding on to the fragile thread of hope that had once tied them together, hoping that, with time, they could mend what had been broken. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?